Greetings to all you folks out there in the human community and on YouTube. My name is Mark. It's been a while since you've last seen me do a sword review. Not since the dead of winter. Now it's summer. But anyways, yeah, it's been a while. So today I want to talk to you about this. This is Black Horse Blades Arbeitsphert, or Workhorse Federschwert. This was sent to me by Logan Black for review a couple of months ago. Not mine to keep, just so you guys know. And yeah, now that I've had it for a few months, and now that I've filmed a review, quite frankly, filmed one, decided I didn't like the way it turned out, I'm going to once again try to talk to you about this thing, and hopefully you'll find everything I have to say about this thing useful. So, let's check it out. So first, I'm going to talk about the basic measurements and specifications. It's all stuff you can find on the site, but yeah, I like to actually tell you. So, the thing is 50 inches long overall. The handle is 12.25 or 12¼ inches long, with 2 of those inches being the pommel. The blade, therefore, is 37¾ or 37.75 inches long overall. And the crossguard is going to be 10 inches long overall. And let's see, the blade is 1/4 inch thick, all the way to about this point, which is, I want to say, what, 5/8 down the blade-ish, a little bit more than 2/3, but not too much, so I'm probably getting my fractions wrong. But at this point here, it tapers down to 0.118 inches thick, and that's going to be where the flex is going to be in the blade. So, those are your basic measurements. The weight is 3 pounds, 4 ounces, so 3¼ ounces, 3¼ pounds, sorry, and the balance point is 2¾ inches from the cross, or 2.75 inches, so right at about the end of the shield here. It's always fun trying to balance these things. Yeah. Anyways, so those are your basic specs and measurements. So now I actually want to move on and talk about the materials. Alright, so what's this bad boy made of? Well, the blade and the crossguard are made of Shock 7 steel. The handle is made of Ipe. The wrapping, depending on whether you have a cord or leather, obviously. The cord, I'm not sure what the exact material is, but I can say that it is nice and soft and it is double braided. Excuse me. And the leather is a veg tan leather. And then finally we have the pommel, which is made out of mild steel. And then, going to skip ahead into construction, we also have a hex nut that is made of Shock 7 steel as well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. Alright, so going further into detail about these materials, so this thing is primarily made of Shock 7 steel. That's one of the biggest selling points of this sword. And why is it made of Shock 7? Because it is the most shock-resistant tool steel out there. Like, it's just bar none. It is really tough steel. And it is, let's see, it's 125 foot-pound shock-resistant steel, if I remember correctly. And yeah, another fun detail about it is it doesn't seem to rust all that much compared to different steels that I've encountered. So I've had this sword, like I mentioned, for a few months now. And let's take a look at this mild steel pommel. See how yucky and rusted it's gotten. And then compare it to the blade and the crossguard. It's yeah, it's looking pretty good. Let's do a quick overpass here. Right. So, that's not the main selling point of it, obviously, but it's a nice touch. Now, to talk about the handle material, Ipe. So Ipe is a hardwood, I believe it's a Brazilian hardwood, and it has, if I consult my notes, I know I'm so professional. Alright, 3,510 foot-pounds, or 15,620 newtons on the Janka hardness test. I don't really know what the Janka hardness test is all about, but from those numbers, what I can suffice to say is that this is just a really, really hard wood, and it's going to take a lot of effort to actually cause any damage to it. And let's see. Mild steel pommel is mild steel. Not really much to talk about there. Let's see. I already mentioned the cord wrapping, how nice and soft it is, how it's double braided. I guess I can say about the double braid is that it's there to not only make it feel better, but it's also to keep it from unraveling when you get, you know, the inevitable damage to the cord that there is going to be like this. I've heard stories and whatnot of swords that have had a piece of the cord around here burst and just come unraveled completely. So obviously we don't want that. But if you get it as a leather cover, the leather is veg tan, which I'm told is not only more historically accurate, in case that's important to you, but it's also more eco-friendly, which is another big plus. So on my sword, I'm actually going to get veg tan on mine. So yeah. And let's see. I mentioned that the hex nut is also made out of Shock 7 steel as well. So yeah, those are the materials in a bit better detail. Now, for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to start by saying that all of the steel components are done by machine in some capacity. So the blade, the silhouette, and the fullers are done in CNC. The crossguard is done with machining, not with CNC, but with a machine through a machine shop. And that is also true for the pommel. And then for the thickness of the blade, this part is done by machine as well, not in the CNC. All right, the handles are carved by hand. So basically, Logan just takes the pieces of Ipe and he carves them. And each individual handle is also carved to fit each individual tang, meaning that he takes the handles and he individually takes them and carves them to fit the tang as tightly as possible. And so that ensures that the sword is going to avoid coming unraveled and undone and breaking and all that sorts of stuff. And even after abusing this thing for a few months now, this thing still just rings like a bell. This thing is tight, and I have not had to have anything done as far as tightening the pommel or anything like that. The cord is wrapped by hand, obviously, and the leather is also cut and applied and stitched by hand as well if you get a leather wrapping on the handle. So yeah, that's the basic construction for those of you who are curious about that sort of thing. Alright, so I'm going to talk really quickly about the handling. There's not really that much to say, thankfully. So really, it's engineered to be a very maneuverable, light, and quick sword, as you probably have already guessed based on the specifications alone, being a 3-pound, 4-ounce sword with a balance point that's close to the hilt. It's pretty agile, and yeah, and it's really fast too, especially since it's 50 inches, so it's not as long as some of the much longer faders out there, so it's very nimble, very quick. As far as stiffness goes, it's a pretty stiff sword. It's not the stiffest out there. There are a few that are slightly stiffer out there, but it's still good enough to flex safely, but still make your opponent respect the point. Let's see here. The pommel also feels quite nice in the hand. Even though some people don't necessarily like the look of it, when you're wearing gloves, it's very accommodating because some people like to grip the very end of the sword for some reason. I personally don't like to, but that's just me. But if you find yourself wanting to grip the pommel, that's easily done, as it's also just as easily done as gripping the very end right around here. And you can actually just very easily just change your grip however you want to, just because of the way the shape is done and how fleshed this pommel is compared to the profile of the handle itself. The handle is it's a little wider than some of the other fetters on the market, which I kind of like. Some people call it cylindrical, which is more so the case down here, you know, where it's supposed to be. There's still some flatness to the side, you know, so you can feel your edge alignment, but the edge side of the profile is not as narrow as you're going to find in a lot of swords, which I personally like, even though personally I would like it to be a little bit thicker, but that's just me. Your mileage may also vary. But yeah, that is basically how the handling goes. So yeah. So with handling and specs and all that good stuff, all the basic stuff out of the way, I want to talk about durability. So how durable is this thing? Will it last long enough to be worth the price point? And quite frankly, yes. Yes, it will. It has been engineered to last about 10 years is the hopeful lifespan. Obviously, the swords haven't been around long enough to really put that to the test, but based on what I've experienced with the sword, that seems perfectly viable. So the Shock 7 steel is tempered to about 57 Rockwell, which is what's giving it the amount of flex that it currently has and how durable it is. And yeah, and then we've got the Ipe handle that is also a really hard wood, and that is not going to break on you anytime soon unless you do stupid stuff and don't do stupid stuff. So what defines stupid stuff? Well, blocking with the handle consistently all the time. Don't do that. That's going to break your handle. Just eventually it's going to happen no matter what sort of space age material you're going to have with it. Doing stupid stuff like smashing cinder blocks with the pommel. You know, practicing Mordhauts are fun and all that, but you don't want to damage your nice feather. You don't want to do that. But barring stupid stuff, again, this sword is just going to last you a really freaking long time. And actually, especially after I've given Logan a bit of feedback about this sword, because I actually took this example to short point and fought with it. And on my very last exchange, in my very last bout, I landed a very, very, very hard Zornort on my opponent. And basically, why was it so hard? I'm about 190 pounds. And my opponent was also probably about that weight, if not heavier. And we came at each other full speed, and I managed to lock in his sword, land the thrust, and I've had two different descriptions of what happened to the sword. I've heard it referred to as a full rainbow bend, so I can't even do it here. It was bent so far. And another person who was watching described it as a 90-degree bend. And this is the end result. If you can see any imperfections in the profile of the blade, that's basically because of that really, really nasty blow that happened. And that is going to be, you know, not in the realm of normalcy, but again, it happened. So the bend that it took happened right at the taper point, and it bent like about 20 degrees off to the side, you know, after everything was said and done. But after the fight, I literally just did the Olympic fencing method of straightening it out, just standing on it, you know, at the bend point and just pulling it off the ground. And it's looking pretty good. There's a bit of an S-bend in there, but not much. But this thing is going to last for a very, very, very long time still. And like I said, I gave Logan some feedback about it, and he didn't think that was safe enough. So now they're going to be tempered, the blades that is. The blades are going to be tempered even harder now so that they're going to be a bit stiffer to avoid that sort of thing happening, because he does not want these things failing like at all, if at all possible. He wants these things to be as sturdy as they can physically be. So that's that I think is a really good selling point. And yeah, so while this one was a 57 Rockwell, which was a little bit softer than Jake Norwood's was if you read his review, that's basically why it did what it did in that fight. But I mean, this sword is still, like I demonstrated before, it just rings like a bell still. This thing is not loosened at all. It's just, this thing's going to last forever. It is, well, a workhorse. Now I want to get into what I'm going to consider to be sort of the bread and butter of my review, is the possible customizations that you can do with one of these swords. So it's understood that not everyone is going to like, you know, 100% of the aspects about this sword, but the beauty of the way these are done is that there's so many different customization options available, because the only thing that's CNC'd is the blade. The rest of these components have different aspects that can be changed depending on what you may or may not like. So to start with, the most basic things you can customize are going to be your grip color, and there are a lot of grip colors out there. I'm not even going to try to explain how many there are. There are a bunch. Basically, sky's the limit as far as the blade, not the blade, the handle colors are concerned. And then you've also got the shield. So the way the shield is done is, if you can look at this profile, you'll see that this was essentially just cut out of a little square. And if you visit their website, you can also see the measurements of the little shield square. And so with shield customization, if you want to get a different shaped shield, there's a variety of different things you can do. Essentially, you can have any shape of shield that you want as long as it fits in this little box. And that, I think, is really, really cool. And unless the shield design you come up with is extremely extravagant or difficult to make, it's not going to be an upcharge. You're not going to have to spend any more on it. You can also get a differently shaped crossguard, which is cool because, oh, I forgot to mention this in the handling, but the crossguard has this sort of roundish profile over it. So if you're like me, who likes to do the early election hour stuff and actually, put the thumb on the flat, it can be a bit uncomfortable because there's a bit of leeway here where your thumb can really rub up against there. But apparently a lot of people like to thumb this part of the sword, which, if that's the case, then you're good to go. But if you don't necessarily like that, you can ask to have your crossguard shaped slightly differently. And I think Logan's actually looking at making a few other sort of quote-unquote standard crossguard shapes for people with different tastes. And again, much like with the shield, as long as the crossguard shape isn't too difficult or crazy to make, they're not going to make you spend any extra money on that either. And there's also a similar thing with the pommel. Like I mentioned before, some people don't like the look of the pommel, and so you can ask before you order to have a differently shaped pommel. You're going to have to discuss with them, obviously, what kind of pommel shape you want, and depending on the pommel shape, much like the shield and the crossguard, and if it's an easy enough shape to make, then they can make a differently shaped pommel with no extra upcharge. And you can also customize your grip profile as well. Some people have mentioned that they would want it to be less cylindrical. Some people mentioned they would want it to be wider or thicker or what have you. Well, if you talk to Logan, he can do that. And, as long as it's not a crazy extravagant shape, it shouldn't cost you any extra money to have something like that done either. Another thing that you can customize is actually where your fullers are placed on the sword. For me, being someone who also likes montante stuff, I like to have a sword with a bit more forward balance in the sword. You can have it set so that the fullers actually start farther up on the blade, giving you a bit more blade weight in it. And so that's another thing you can do, which that I don't believe costs you any extra either. And there are a few other things that some people might not like about the sword, be the measurements or whatnot, that they might want to customize too. So as far as that is concerned, if you want to customize your sword to have a shorter handle, that can be done with no extra charge, so long as you bring it up first before the build is actually started, because it's a really big pain to have to take a sword that's already been made and then cut off this bit of the handle and rethread the end of it. So you can have a shorter handle done, which is no problem. However, one thing that cannot be done, unfortunately, is you cannot have the sword made any longer than 50 inches just because of the heat treating process. So essentially, Logan has to have these blades and crossguards shipped off site to be heat treated because he has them heat treated in an aerospace heat treating facility. And it's literally not something that he can do in-house, unfortunately. It would cost a lot of money in order to get the equipment needed to do something like that. And the maximum length on stuff that he can send to this heat treat facility is 50 inches, which is why the length of the fetter is what it is. So Unfortunately, unless you're willing to spend multiple hundreds of dollars to add a couple extra inches to your sword, it's just not going to be worth it. So that is essentially like the one thing that he can't really do unless you're willing to spend a lot of money in order to have that done. Another thing to bear in mind is if you want a longer blade and a shorter handle, meaning as opposed to just chopping off this bit of the handle and leaving the blade the same, if you want to have the same length of sword but proportionally shorter handle, that's going to be a significant upcharge because that requires an entire new program in the CNC machine. And so, again, it's possible. It can be done, but it's going to be expensive. So just bear that in mind. So essentially, while this is your standard shape, you can, like, if you have an easy enough design in mind, you can have something that looks completely different to this, but it's still essentially, you know, one of these swords, you know, made for you, essentially almost a custom fetter for no extra charge. Again, you know, so long as the design isn't too crazy or difficult to make. So that, I think, is really cool. And yeah, that's all the various customization options out there, which is pretty awesome if you ask me. Okay, so next up, I want to just cover some miscellaneous options that either don't fit in the other categories or, quite frankly, or just stuff I may have forgotten to mention in other sections of the video. So, miscellaneous stuff. Well, the first thing I want to bring up is this tachikaze is amazing. Tachikaze, meaning sword wind, the Japanese term, essentially is this nice whoosh sound you get when you have good edge alignment in your cuts. And why is that important? Well, if you're training by yourself, it's useful to have the tachikaze sound as a feedback mechanism to tell you if your cuts were good or, you know, if they were off or flubbed or something like that. So it can be a very useful training tool, and it can be very important to some practitioners like myself, or even some Japanese sword artists who are also doing the European stuff. So yeah, and the next thing actually is that this thing has a lobed tip, which I really, really love. Why does that matter? Well, because quite frankly, rolled tips break. It's just becoming more and more apparent. With this lobe tip, there is no little thin piece of steel that can break off if an accident happens or if you hit someone too hard or something, or just general wear and tear. The lobe tip is just going to last longer, and I would argue is even safer just because, again, you don't have to worry about a thin piece of steel snapping or breaking, and it's this very just thick glob of steel that isn't going to pierce anyone's skin. And I've also heard and seen rolled tips actually piercing skin. One of my club mates, I believe, actually got stabbed in the armpit with a rolled tip and it actually penetrated skin. That's not going to happen with one of these. And another benefit to that too is that you don't need to put a rubber tip on the end, which I hate putting rubber tips on the end of these things. So yeah, that's also a really big plus in my mind. Let's see. As for other miscellaneous stuff, I think personally that the pictures online don't really do this thing justice. When I first opened it, I realized it's a lot better looking, even more beautiful than it looks online, just because of the way the various carvings and the way the fullers and the shaping of the crossguard, the way everything, the light just gleams off of it. It looks a lot nicer than in the pictures, which is really cool. And another thing about looks is that it actually looks smaller than it is, just because of how narrow the profile is and all that. This isn't a short fetter by any means, and I think just the profile and the aesthetics of it make it look smaller than it is. So something to look out for. I mean, 50 inches is not short by any means. I mean, now the Lichtenauer is what, 47 3/4 inches long, something along those lines. So there's easily a good couple inches this has on one of those. I'm sorry, not the Lichtenauer, the Allian Meyer, though I think they're about the same length. So yeah. And I believe that is everything there is in the miscellaneous options. So, yeah. Now, with everything else out of the way, I want to discuss the elephant in the room, which is the price point. The price point for this sword is $580 US, with about $20 in shipping and handling for shipping within the US. Now, the obvious question is this sword worth it? And the answer is yes. Yes, it is. For a few reasons, actually. The first and most important one being that the sword with an expected lifespan of about 10 years, you take 10 years over like $600, you're definitely like paying a good amount for each year of service that it's getting. And then there's also the fact that the price point on this sword is actually low for what it should be, because the profit margins on it are actually really, really small. So small, in fact, that it's not a viable business model to try to make money off of these things, and that actually isn't the point. The point is to get the sturdiest, safest fetter that Logan can make and put it on the market so that people will be able to practice HEMA, safely and for a very long time. And that's really what this sword is all about, and that's what you're ending up paying for, is the really long durability, and then also the really high quality materials that are being used in the construction of this sword. And so, yeah, as far as the price point goes, I mean, he could be charging more and more, but he isn't, because that's really not the point. But yeah, and another good reason is also that Logan also will do payment plans if you would like to. And payment plans that are interest-free, mind you. You don't if you end up doing that option, you don't pay more for the sword than what you would have in the first place, because you're just literally paying off the $580 in monthly chunks, up to about a year, actually. I think he'll do a year at the maximum. And he actually starts the sword build once you've paid off 70% of the cost of the build. So, yeah, it's a pretty expensive sword, but I mean, it's absolutely worth it. I think it's worth every single penny, and you're not going to find a much better sword for the cost on the market anytime soon, if ever. So, yeah, that is basically it. I mean, it's a very comfortable sword to use. It's fast. It will last you a really long time. I really can't make any complaints about it, except minor things that you can end up just customizing away. So yeah, that is the Black Horse Blades Arbeitsphert, Federschwert, and I have been Mark, and hopefully you have found this review useful. I'll see you all next time. Before I forget, actually, I should probably mention the fact that Logan, after seeing a relative bump in the orders for the sword after Short Point and after various reviews like Jake Norwood's came out, he is considering making an arming sword and a messer. However, he's not really going to start doing that unless he gets some indication that there is interest for such thing on the market. So, if I could just ask a favor of all of you guys, if you could let me know, or find Logan Black on Facebook or email him on his website, and let him know if you are interested in seeing an arming sword or a messer that is done like this sword. And oh yeah, another thing is he also has a blunt longsword that he is making that he's going to be calling the Iron Horse. And what's the difference between a blunt longsword and a fetter is essentially the longsword is going to be like an actual blade profile instead of a shield in a narrow sword. So it's going to be shaped and handle a little bit more like an actual sword. So that's something to look forward to as well. And yeah, now that is basically it. And now I'll see you all in the next video, whatever that is. Take care, guys.